What if your company had a tool that would allow you to uncover hidden truths that your customers and your employees are not telling you? Not the stuff that ends up on your marketing reports and your dashboards. No, I'm talking about these truths that are the key to keeping your people engaged and enriching the experience of your customers and your employees. Well, luckily for you, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's episode. Welcome to the Storytelling Lab, where we break down the art and science of storytelling. My name is Bennett. I'm your host, and I'm a filmmaker and an author on a quest to understand how we can tell better stories so that we can do better work and make the world a better place. Each episode, I host one of the world's best storytellers to help you understand how to leverage storytelling to increase your sales, deepen your connections, and serve your audiences better. What's up, storytellers? Welcome back to the Storytelling Lab podcast. This is episode 201, and today my guest is James Warren of Share More Stories, and also the SEEQ platform. That's SEEQ, which stands for Stories to Engage, Explore, and Question. This is a storytelling and insights tool that uses data to help you understand more thoroughly the experiences of your customers, your employees, of all your stakeholders. James is a brand guy. He worked at JMI for 10 years, for brand strategy of Altria Group for like 10 or 15 before that. And he understands the power of stories to unlock these things. That is when and why he created Share More Stories. And through Share More Stories, he works with brands and organizations to help them understand these hidden truths, these underlying things that are pulled out, that are revealed from storytelling to keep people emotionally engaged and keep them moving forward towards the action you're trying to motivate. In this conversation, we talk about how to create the culture at your company, a culture that uses storytelling as a strategy, because you have to understand all your stakeholders are people on your team, in your community. It's not customer versus employee. These are all your stakeholders, and their experiences aren't that different. James uses AI, uses tech tools, and blends them with the empathy that is inherent to storytelling and keeps it human so that you can use the data and these insights to understand your stakeholders better, to understand their minds and their hearts and what motivates them and what enriches their experience. This is for leaders. This is for marketers. This is for storytellers. Anybody that wants to employ storytelling as a strategy. It starts with the culture first, and then absolutely, you use the tech tools that are at your disposal, that are at all of our disposal currently, to find that happy medium between the head and the heart, between art and science, so that you can do better, deeper, more meaningful work. This is my conversation with James Warren, and I hope that you love it. Hey, James, welcome to the Storytelling Lab, my friend.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah. We get the chance to not travel for the moment and just nerd out about storytelling. So
definitely
a good chunk of time for folks like you and I. I mentioned right before we started recording that I am really excited to talk to you about your specific approach. You very clearly have the heart of a storyteller and someone who understands the power and the impact of stories. But you use a lot of data, you use a lot of analytics, you use a lot of tech tools to I don't want to explain this, I want you to, but it seems like to understand, to analyze, and hopefully to therefore produce and deliver stories better. So I just want to jump right in, because I think the conversation is going to take us where it's supposed to go. I don't want to control it too much, but I was really interested in this platform SEEQ that you have, which is an acronym, SEEQ. I'd like for you to explain what that is, but let's just jump in from right there. Like, what is that? Why did you build it? How did you build it? Tell me all about it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I'll answer the first question right away, right? So SEEQ is a storytelling and insights platform. We call it a human experience platform. And it stands for Stories to Engage, Explore, and Question. And, the answer to why did we build it sort of goes back to the beginning of why we started this company, Share More Stories, which really is to use stories as a means of us understanding each other, connecting with each other, engaging each other. And sometimes that's really starts with the individual, right? Like when I go through my own stories, my own experiences, I learn more about myself. I can look at the journey I've been on and make more sense of it. And that starts to scale. I can do that with my team. I can do that with the broader organization. I can do that with our consumers and customers. I can do that with the community. And so we started realizing that, as we all know, as you know, and I know, stories are powerful for lots of things. And one of those things is kind of the insight, the wisdom that a story holds. I think there's a reason why when we're kids, we're told bedtime stories that have a moral. They say the moral of the story is because there's a lesson. There's some nugget in even the simplest things that we're supposed to learn about one another's experiences. Because also there's some things that maybe aren't so great, and I don't want to have to experience every bad thing on my own to know I shouldn't do it. So stories give us that inspiration. They also give us lessons. They also give us sometimes warnings. And I think that's true not just in our individual lives and throughout sort of humanity. I think that's also true in business, in the organization, in the brand, and in the community. And so we started building a platform to make that actionable, to bring people together. We used to do it only in like workshop settings. And then we started saying, hey, we got to scale this, but we can't lose the fidelity. We can't lose that emotionality. Um, and we were able to do it. And so the SEEQ platform allows people to explore a topic that might be relevant to what our customer is exploring, either in the organization, in the marketplace, or more broadly in society. And they write stories about those experiences, and we analyze them using AI and other tools and really help our clients better understand what's happening in the experiences of the people they're there to serve. How do they feel about those experiences? Why are those experiences happening to them, and why do they matter to them? And what can they do to make them better? So that's the whole kit and
That's
caboodle, if you will.
so who is your typical customer or client?
Yeah. So we work a lot with organizational leaders, experienced leaders on more the marketing and product side. And then we work sometimes with individual, maybe nonprofit or community leaders who are really trying to address an issue that either their organization is responsible for, or something that they're really just trying to say, how do I show up as a more effective leader? And so anywhere we start with that leader who has the mindset of, I can be a better leader through listening to the stories of people around me. I can be a better leader by sharing my own story, and I can translate that into a stronger organizational culture, a stronger brand, and a stronger community. That's who we want to work with. We do a lot of it in like emotional rich places like travel. Travel is so emotionally resonant.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
do lots of storytelling in that space. And it's deep, it's emotional. It's some of those stories are hard to
yeah.
sort of absorb, but they tell us so much.
Totally agree with that, and it's something that's also very individualized. Like my trip to Colombia would be
Yes.
different than yours. Like what hit me, and therefore the people who would resonate with my version would probably be different than yours, or at least if we're doing it right. Is that
Yes.
fair to say?
It's exactly right. And what you're hitting at is a powerful thing we see in this type of work, this storytelling based sort of insights work. There's commonalities that aren't always obvious, and there's uniquenesses or differences that aren't always obvious. You take two people who maybe have traveled to the same place, and you could assume, hey, everything about them is the same because they have the same demographics and they went to the same place. Therefore, we should market to them the same, engage them the same, offer them the same experiences on their trip. But those two people might have fundamentally different reasons for going, fundamentally different reasons. Their deeper emotional desires or needs that they're trying to fulfill in that trip could be different. And that, I don't think everything we do all day, every day is deeply considered. That's a different topic for a different day. But
Yeah.
I do think, there's a subconscious decision making that's happening that is speaking to our why, speaking to our desires, our values, our needs. And when you understand that, you can be more relevant to a person. Even if they're exhibiting the same behavior,
Mhm.
if their reason for doing it is different, you can better meet their needs. And you might also better anticipate when they're like, this isn't working for me anymore, in ways that all the other analytics and behavioral predictions and all that stuff maybe might miss.
And what's your background? Like, what led you to all this? I know you've had share more stories in the Seek platform for quite a while, but where did you cut your teeth, as they say?
Let's see. I've been a storyteller on some level and
Yeah.
and a writer since I was a kid. My mom used to bring me out in cocktail parties in my little, remember the pajamas with the stocking feet, the little plastic
Oh
feet?
yeah.
She'd bring me
Oh
out
yeah.
and have me tell stories when I was 2 and 3. And apparently, I just was at my college reunions and my teammates reminded me of the clearly, fictional stories. I would come into the boathouse and just tell them for laughs. I would come in and just make up stories about all kinds of things. And I guess I've been doing this my whole life. I think more on the business side, I started my career years ago in Altria Group, consumer packaged goods company, heavy in the tobacco industry, but they also worked in food and alcohol beverage. And so when I got my start in the company, I was working first in communications and then corporate responsibility, and then gradually started to work on new products and new business development. And I've always enjoyed making, creating, and building things. Yes, I love to write, but I really love the idea of what the writing is about. It's about creating not just a story, but like a world or an imagination or a scene. And that building has always motivated me. So, I had opportunity back in 2014 after I left Altria to start this company. And I felt like all of my entrepreneurial goals, desires, my creative pursuits were all coming together in this one opportunity. And I was like, if I don't do this now, I'll probably regret it for the rest of my life. So I took the plunge and as I'm sure you can relate, there have been ups and downs, more ups than downs. And that's the journey, that's the story.
That's all you can ask for, right?
Exactly.
More ups than downs. Now I'm curious, and this is a bit of a leap, but maybe not. With Altria Group and considering their products and what they did, and some of those being maybe a little delicate, right? Tobacco products, alcoholic products. I'm curious if navigating narratives was something that was important to that organizational culture, and if maybe you learned something at being at a place like that, which probably, again, an assumption on my part, had to constantly either construct certain narratives or avoid other narratives. Does that make sense? And is that accurate?
No, I hear you loud and clear. I think
Okay.
from my experience and observation, it was less about narrative making, quote unquote,
Uh-huh.
and I have thoughts about that in general.
Sure.
And it was more about realizing probably in the early 2000s, if my memory serves, late 90s, early 2000s, that clearly society's expectations were changing, society's attitudes
Yeah.
towards tobacco were changing, and the company realized if we want to exist, we know we make a product that many people don't like or approve of, and it's a product that causes harm. But if we're going to exist in a place where people can, knowing the facts, choose to use that product, we've still got to change how we do it. And so the company has been, and I haven't been there for what, 12, 11 years, but from what I've seen over the decades, they've been on their own journey, which is really to say, hey, how do we really think about what we do, how we do it, and how do we continue to make exist as a business, but do so in a way that is more and more responsible. And some people will say, I don't think a company like that can ever be responsible. And if that's how you feel, then there's never a good enough solution to that. But if you believe there's room for people to choose or to use products, even ones that do cause harm, because we do it every day, it's just a matter of what is the level of transparency and honesty that the company is demonstrating. And I think that they have done that. I think a lot of that has been the changes that the industry's had to make. But I also think within that, companies like that chose how much they wanted to lead versus follow. And from my experience and observation, they definitely chose to lead. So I think there was a lot of hard work, a
Yeah.
lot of public engagement.
That's
And
important.
I think if you look at the industry today, it's very different than it was then. I don't see that as the function of narrative making as much as just the journey of navigating change.
Yeah.
I think you can tell that story once it's done. I don't think those kinds of stories are very effective on the front end if the proof isn't there. So I think, some narratives are really a function of this is where we are,
Hmm.
this is how we got here, and this is where we're going. And I think those are really authentic narratives. when we work with organizations and communities in particular, that's the kind of narrative making we try to help them explore through the stories of their people is where are you today? How did you get here and where you're going versus we were here, now we're here, and then we're going there. It's not chronological. It's more revelatory. And so I think those narratives are authentic. I think trying to make a narrative to manipulate the future, I think nowadays it's extremely see-through. And you don't have the proof to back it up. And that's where it really, really burns.
Great answer to that question. I appreciate you. You've said the term organizational culture today, and you've talked already a lot about organizations. I'm working on a book right now about the role of the chief storyteller or the chief storytelling officer, which is look, you got all excited. That got me excited, which is a role that is increasing in frequency or number out there. It's been around for a while. So, I've been thinking a lot about not just how do we tell stories outwardly, right, or the structure of stories and things like that, but rather, or also, how do we create a culture of storytelling that is vertically like woven through, it cascades down from the top to the bottom of the company, so to speak. I don't have a direct question. I just want to kind of talk to you about the importance of that. Seeing your copy and your language online, it seems like that's something that you really get and go after.
Yes.
And you're nodding your head, so I think you know where I'm trying to go here.
100%.
So just talk to me about the importance of that, how you establish that. Like, think about a brand that's starting out and they want that, but they don't know how to begin to go to create that.
I love it. I think that, first of all, what you're talking about, the intentionality of creating or organizations realizing that this role should exist. They could decide whether or not they believe that role exists and should be part of the responsibility of their executives, or their culture carriers and champions, or anybody in the organization. But I think the point you're making is about the focus and intention of using storytelling to drive culture, and to reflect culture. And I couldn't agree more on several levels. The first thing I would say is I see that as being a steward of, back to the point about narrative. I know narrative can sometimes come across in a sort of fake or manipulative way, and we're not talking about that. So what we mean is literally, like I said, here's where we are, here's where we were, and here's where we're going. And I always go that route because I think people in an organization, they are in the moment. They are living and breathing and experiencing the culture as it is. And so that's their entry point. And you always want to meet people where they are. And so storytellers that start with where we are and then go backwards a little bit to explain how we got here, I think they captivate the attention of their listeners and viewers and audiences in a small conversation at a coffee table in the company's lobby, on a giant, global podcast to their employees and everywhere else they want to tell the brand and the organization's stories. And I think that role should be understood and appreciated at a leadership level, because one of the things that we've experienced and seen, even with some of our recent work, is leadership culture sets organizational climate. And so I know that culture is bigger than a leadership team, of course, but leadership culture, that subculture, how does the leadership team behave and think and move, and what do they talk about, and what stories do they share, and what do they emphasize? It sets climate, and the climate almost gives the rest of the organization a sense of, look, this is what we're going to be operating with. It's like, if I know that it's going to be sunny and 80 degrees, I know how to pack. If I don't know what the weather's going to be, I'm either packing everything or I'm not going on the trip. And so climate gives the team more broadly a little bit of a clue, like, what's it going to be like working here? What's it going to be like to solve problems here? What's it going to be like when I make a mistake or fail or get lost? Do I have to have every single solution already thought out, or will I be in a place where we can kind of figure it out together? And so I think that when you have a leadership mindset, a leadership culture that really helps influence the broader culture through stories about success, especially stories about failure. When leaders demonstrate the vulnerability of sharing stories about failure, it is like a superpower in that organization. And yet most leaders really struggle with it. They really struggle with it because they feel like if I'm vulnerable, then I'm less than the leader that they expect me to be. And the couldn't be further from the truth. If they're vulnerable, they become more than the leader they could have ever imagined. And that's why I think it's so crucial for leaders to lean into that vulnerability, to share stories, to share their own experiences, and not just do the, as we say, the royal we. I tell our folks in our workshops all the time, no we stories. This is a you story. You have to talk about your experience because that's how humans really, really relate and connect.
Absolutely. Um, kind of still following that thread, I saw something about your platform. You said SEEQ helps companies and organizations understand and improve employee and customer experiences, EX and CX. And I wanted to also kind of dive into that because I think the good storytelling cultures or good storytelling companies, you always hear about user experience, customer experience, but I
Yes.
don't as often hear about EX, employee experience. But I think that
Yes.
is equally as important, and I think storytelling is a tool that can equally apply to both sides of that. Can you talk to me a little bit more about how it helps employee experience, why that's important, how we can use storytelling for the internal team, not
Yes.
necessarily just for external communications?
100%. Well, part of it is I think, modern brands and modern, forward-looking brands understand the brand can't be one thing outside and a different thing inside. So culture is the internal experience of the brand promise. If it's not, you have a disconnect on your hands. And if your culture and your brand don't match, as one of my friends used to say, if the audio and the video don't match, you got a problem. And so,
Definitely.
this relationship between employee experience and customer experience is both very sort of old school and foundational, but it's also getting a lot of current attention because many companies are now realizing we got to improve the customer experience. We got to improve the customer experience. And they're realizing the customer experience is delivered. Yes, it's delivered by your app and your site and your products, but it's delivered either directly or indirectly by the people behind that app, that
Yeah.
digital experience, that product. Sometimes that's actually very one-to-one, say at retail. Um, Sometimes it's through how your teams support customers online. Sometimes it's through the intentionality of how your teams design the chatbot and think about every aspect of what the customer is going through. And so when leaders empathize with their employees, they create better experiences for them. That enables those employees to empathize with the customer, and that creates better experiences for them. And so what you're really saying, hey, leader, if you want to improve that customer experience and improve brand satisfaction, loyalty, you have to work upstream. You've got to really focus on your employees. Even if you have 100,000 employees, if you have 100,000 employees, you've probably got 10 million to 50 million customers. If you've got 1,000 employees, you've probably got 100,000 to 200,000 customers. So the multiplier effect kind of makes sense. I can really, really make an impact in my organization and culture, and they can make an impact on the customer experience far better than us just trying to brute force it, to over engineer it, because customers are funny. If they don't like it, guess what? They do their own thing.
Yeah.
And so the employee experience is to us crucial to delivering the customer experience that most of these executive leaders, brand leaders want. And we've seen that in our work. We've seen that when you center the employee and you say, hey, what you're going through, what you're enjoying, what you're not enjoying, when you're thriving, that's the story you want to hear, because we're building our culture around those positive experiences you're having. And we believe those positive experiences are going to help you drive better experiences for our customers. Um, I think that's really where this needs to go in the long term, but also we're seeing really, really good signs that it's working in the short term.
Do you think that it's important for a company, a brand, to have a process to mine for stories internally, like a what would you call it? I mean, any process to extract stories from their employees, from their teams internally. I know some that have held literally like story hours or
Yes,
something like that. Do you think it's important for them? Because often I hear people say like, well, they just don't know like how to go about getting them. Like
that's right.
they have the motivation, they want to do it, but often people aren't just knocking down their door to be like, hey, I got stories to share.
That's right. You've hit on a really, really critical paradox, right? Which
Yeah.
is everybody's got dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of stories to share. And most of us don't walk around all day saying, hey, I've got a story I want to share with you. And
Yeah.
so the stories are both always around us and sometimes hard to get out. And they're hard to get out for a couple of reasons, which is why organizations need to be intentional about it. The
Yes.
first is people realize the story is almost always far more personal than just what I might post on social or what I might write in a review. It's less transactional, it's more relational. So because of that, people have a natural fear of either being vulnerable, like we said earlier, or fear of maybe loss of privacy or fear of judgment. And so when you have those things, it's important for the organization, especially for leaders, to create an environment that makes it easier for people to overcome those fears. The first thing they can do to make that environment is to role model it, to lead with story sharing anytime they can, every time they can, because that, to your point, that sets culture and tone. The second thing they can do is create more intentional spaces and places, whether those are in real life, in person. Hey, there's this place or booth in the office. Anytime you want to go and pop in and like share a story, you can record it, kind of like a StoryCorps lab thing.
Yeah.
Or we're going to host storytelling focused conversations so that we can learn more about your experiences. Or you can do them online in apps like SEEQ or other tools out there. And all of those help the people who want to share their stories typically go through maybe a little bit more structure so that they don't feel lost. Like, well, where would I start? What kind of story
Yeah.
would I focus on? These things help people go from being overwhelmed by their own story to focusing on a specific story that they could share and usually overcoming their fear in the process. So that's why I think it's important to set up that kind of, a little bit of structure, not to sort of beat the creativity out of it, but to give people something a little bit more grounded to hold on to. And it also helps you make sure, if you're doing that in your organization, that you're hearing from a wide range of people, not just the folks who are really, really wired to love storytelling, because there's plenty more people who have stories to share who, like we said, aren't going to be knocking the door down to do it. You got to create a space and an invitation for them.
I wonder if there'd be a way to. This is a bit random, so bear with me, but there was a museum I went to in Florida, or an aquarium, I think, that had an exhibit on hurricanes, and then it just had a kind of like a StoryCorps set up where you could just push a button and record like your hurricane story.
Yes.
And I was really, I did that because I have one, I have several. I grew up on the coast of North Carolina, and have lost homes, and I wouldn't really call it incentive necessarily, but it motivated me. Like, I want to share my story too.
Yes.
I empathize. I connect with those people who have lost their homes in Florida, and then I shared mine. I'm just wondering if there's a way to, again, incentivize, for lack of a better word, employees, because I think people want to share. They're a little reluctant, but if you can find that point of connection, like it did with me, the hurricanes, that's what prompted me to want to do it, because
Yeah.
I kind of saw myself in the stories that were on the poster boards, and I was like, well, I want to leave my story. I went through something too. So again, there's no real question. I'm just kind of thinking out loud if there could be a creative way to create a space, as you said, for people to share their stories, or at an organization.
I think it's understanding, in whatever that context is, what's sort of the triggering event.
Yeah.
And the triggering event could be something that's obviously happening that's big and major, and it puts us in a space of, wanting the human desire to express is about catharsis. It's also about feeling connected. Like, I need
Yeah.
to feel like I'm not alone in this. And I think that's part of why we share, because we are deeply moved and motivated. And most of those stories are happening in very organic, granular ways, like around, in the car or on a call with your friend, or, you know, even over a meal, you're sharing what happened, and you're typically in those moments where you're triggered by something big and major, you know, you have a lot to say. Then there are stories that I think are more sort of what I would say recollective, right? Like I'm going back, you're asking me to explore a topic, and I'm going back in the memory banks and I'm pulling that story up and out. And I think those are a little bit harder to get at because, again, people aren't living in their past all day, every day, even though their past is influencing the way they live
Of course,
all day, every day.
yeah.
They're not always conscious or cognizant of that. And so you have to prompt them. And I mean that literally. So we use prompts to say, think about a time when, or tell us about a time when, or write about a time when, because most people, when you give them a prompt, we do this in workshops and we do this online, they take a moment, they think, do I have anything like that? And they almost always realize, yeah, I do. And then they start to go into their memory. I think that, you know, then there's other cases where even if that major event that's sort of triggering, it could be a major positive event. You just want to talk about it. There's also, I would say, traumas that people have experienced. And those are probably deeply affecting the individual. And they're also, in some cases, the hardest to help them get to because they're either protecting themselves from that traumatic memory, or they're just coping and trying to navigate. And so I think that's kind of where I see the different ways people get to a place of sharing. And therefore you should design your experience, your place and space and method to reflect what are the people most likely experiencing when we ask them to share their story. Are they responding to and being triggered by a big event? Are they dealing with personal traumas, or even collective traumas? Or are we prompting them because we have a sort of a hypothesis or a suspicion that they've been through this and that they could help us learn from it together?
This is what I love about this form of connection and communication, just kind of long form, free flowing. It's like, I really didn't, you know, as I said in that question, it wasn't really a question. It just popped into my head and I was just kind of yapping, you know, but you handled that so well, like with the triggering event and the catharsis in it. So true. So I'm really glad that I just spat that out without a real direct question, because it gave me, that was such a great response. I appreciate you so much for that. And again, this is why I love conversations like this versus like a questionnaire, you know, type interview. Is like we can just start picking away at the layers and we get to it, even if we don't know exactly where we're going. Same as storytelling.
You just nailed it though, because the same is true. You know, it's like each of these more human interactions, I think, give us more connection, more wisdom, and more motivation, right? Whether we're having just a conversation or we're sharing stories or both, it's about getting beneath the surface. And to your point, I get the world we live in. Trust me, I've done marketing for a long time, research for a long time. I understand that we live in a world where people, quote unquote, have shorter and shorter attention spans. And I always like to buck the trend. So I'm like, well, that's because we've allowed that to happen to ourselves. We're not on some preordained, predisposed arc to shorter and shorter. I mean, like, what's the end of that journey? You know, a nanobyte of information, like, okay.
That's a good point.
And so at some point we have to reclaim kind of this core aspect of our humanity, which is to be in connection with each other. And a big part of that is communication with each other. Not in a way that requires us to soundbite it, to just, like you say, let a conversation happen to see what happens and explore a story to see what I might learn, tell a story to see who might relate. And I think that is, if not a reversal of where we're at, I think that is something that we need in our human experience deeply, because our shorter and shorter, quote unquote, attention spans are also resulting in us connecting less, remembering less, associating less, knowing less, a lot more info, a lot less knowledge. And so I think this is a way to start to flip that script.
I do think / hope that the pendulum is starting to swing back, or at least has stopped, or at least we're talking about it now. Like, if people are aware of this issue, maybe we haven't even made the beginning of the swing back, but we are recognizing it, and that's the first step to change, right? Is saying like, hey, yeah. I think a lot of people are suffering from that. A lot of information, not a lot of knowledge. That's a good line. I want to go back to the prompts. You mentioned the prompts that you will use sometimes. Have you seen any patterns of prompts that tend to always yield great results, or is it completely individualized? All right, yeah, I love that response. You know where I'm going.
It is. It's hilarious you ask these questions. They're really, really insightful.
That's funny.
When we started prompting,
Mhm.
because we were new to this process, I was a storyteller and a writer, and I was used to being very, very, not rigid, but very methodical, I should say, in my writing process. And, we had like a templated form that was like, first describe the situation, then identify the top 3 key moments, then unpack each moment, right? And there was actually parts of that I'm like, the idea of like breaking this experience down was not bad. The idea of putting them in literally a box was bad. And so as our team started to have more experience working together and working in like the workshops, which were the precursor to the SEEQ platform, we started changing the way we would prompt. We would write, I was kind of under the impression that a broad prompt would be easiest for people. That was my assumption. Turns out a broad prompt was really, really hard for people.
Yeah.
And so the thing that blew me away, the very first thing that now become like a bedrock piece of our understanding of how to do this work, was make the prompt as specific as possible. And I was like, that's going to make people be like, I don't have a story about this.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just them getting through that, getting through that fear for a minute. And then they're like, wait a minute. Yeah, something to me, because these are deeper truths, right? Even if I say, tell me about your most memorable travel experience, it could be when you did this or when you did that, or when you did this or when you did that. Those are just like guardrails to help them, latch onto something. When you tell them, though, when you give them those guardrails, invariably they push against them, but in the most constructive way. It's like the creative development process inside an agency. Give me the lines, give me the box, and then I'm gonna like work like hell within that box to make something incredible. But I need something to push against, and so the prompt gives the individual something to push against, to say, and they'll take it where they want to take it, but it's all within this broad bucket. And so it was like the crazy thing was like, the more narrow we get, the deeper and more profound the insight becomes. Which I didn't expect. And so we write the prompts now with much more, not like so specific that a person couldn't relate to it, but more directness, if you will. And then the other thing we've learned, and this is built into the SEEQ platform, is to encourage people to recall the the senses that they were having during that experience. And so, we might say something like, what do you remember smelling or tasting or touching or hearing or seeing during this moment that you're describing? And in person, it's so dope because you see their eyes go up.
Yeah.
And you see them just start to inhabit the memory. They go back and they're like, oh, I remember this. And then they go, because it's now flooding their brain. And we were nervous if we would have that moment when we moved from the workshops to the platform, because we thought so much of that moment of realizing my story was because of the setting in the room and the high touch and all the colorful language and the beautiful slides. And it was just about getting people to a place where they could recall. And so in the platform, that's what they do. We prompt them to recall their senses before they write. And the first project we did, I mean, it was literally the launch of the platform. We were working with a management consulting company to explore, of all things, imposter syndrome, right? So like, I'm having imposter syndrome while we're doing the project, because I'm like, woo, if this doesn't work, we're screwed. But we had built this platform, we tested it, we launched it with this management consulting firm, and they were like, everybody we hire has imposter syndrome. And I was like, what nonsense is this? What do you mean, everybody? How's that possible? And they were like, no. Like, seriously, like, we're finding that everybody has imposter syndrome. And I'm like, do they have the same definition of imposter syndrome that I do? Like, And it turns out they did. And it turns out they were right. And it turns out that by giving these people, a lot of new to their career people and a lot of folks who'd been in the business for 20, 30 years, this tool to first write their experiences on their own and then share them. Oh my gosh, the things that they talked about and wrote about. I mean, we have folks who were 1 and 2 years out of college writing 1,400 words of personal experiences, which is another way of saying if in the right settings, they're not looking for shorter, they're just looking for better, so they went deep. And then we had senior executives who talked about their times having imposter syndrome. And then we realized the answers were literally in the quote unquote room because these executives were talking about how they overcame their imposter syndrome 10, 20, 30 years ago. And these new associates were struggling with the same things they struggled with. And we could see it in the stories. And there was no other way we could have revealed that to them but through those stories. That's when we knew we had something. And that's when we also knew like the moment was still preserved. The moment was still there for the individual. It was just moving from being facilitated to being somewhat self-guided.
Still thinking about kind of the role of the chief storyteller and establishing this organizational culture. I find that sometimes the higher ups, those that, approve, greenlight, make the decisions, may not initially see the potential for ROI on establishing storytelling as a strategy. I think that's changing over time,
Yeah.
but I think it's still there. So my question is, if you were, on the marketing team of a medium-sized business and you wanted to establish something like what we're talking about, like these story hours or anything like that, and I was your boss and I was like, why? Like, why would we spend our time and energy doing this? How do you sell me on storytelling as an organizational strategy?
Wow, that's a great question. I think the first thing I would do is I'd want to know going into it, do you, my boss, are you comfortable with your own story? Because if you're not, I've already got my work cut out for me.
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
but if you're not, I'm going to shift that sell from we need to get them to sell to share their stories to how do we get you comfortable with sharing your story? Because I don't think you can build an organizational culture around storytelling if the leadership doesn't role model it. I think it becomes them, they should do instead of we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have those kind of companies, the first step is really hard, but it is getting the organizational leadership to do two things, to sort of do this dance for a little bit, which is them expressing vulnerability and them being deeply committed to listening. The sell is there are things that people want to tell you, but they can't and don't because all you are giving them is a survey. And what they're really trying to tell you is what you need to know most. It's not the things that confirm what you think you believe about your organization or brand. It's the things that people are dying to tell you, but can or won't. The story is the way that they unpack that. And so at that point, you start to get a little bit of curiosity, like, well, what kind of things would they be telling me? I'm like, they'll tell you what their most memorable experience was working for you and how it made them feel. They'll also tell you about the day they almost were ready to quit and walk out the door. And while that's going to feel heavy for you, A, I guarantee you, you're not getting that in your 5-scale employee engagement survey. And B, wouldn't you be a much more effective leader if you knew that? If you knew not just whether or not they were having a great experience, but why. If you knew why, you could replicate it. If you knew why not, you could fix it. And so we try to start to really hone in on what's that CEO or leader's motivation. Are they trying to just kind of maintain or are they trying to really grow? And if they're trying to grow, we try to help them understand that there's there's sort of parts of the answer that they're not getting and that answer comes from the stories.
So good, man. It's like you've done this for a while, James. You always have an answer for all my questions. Before we go, I want to dive into, we talked so much about other good stuff. I don't want us to miss the opportunity to talk about how you use AI and technology
Sure.
in your storytelling analysis, etc., especially because I think a lot of storytellers, I tend to see like two camps. The ones that completely just use AI for everything that they do, and therefore it loses that authenticity. And those that are like, no, this is an art, this is human. We cannot use that. You seem to be riding the line. You protect the human connection and integrity and the humanity in
Yeah.
it. How do you use tech tools? What tools do you use? I know you use AI and NLP. Explain to me, yeah, how you leverage those tools to analyze, to produce, or any other ways that you do.
Yeah. For me, it went back to tools are ways to solve a specific problem. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we knew we wanted to use stories as the ways to help organizations improve, be better, grow, strengthen their employee engagement or make a better impact in the community or deliver a better, stronger brand. The next question was, well, how will we assess that? How will we
Right.
collect those stories and how will we analyze those stories? And then how will we report out on what we have learned, right? So collection, analysis, reporting. And that follows a pretty traditional research method, but we
Yeah.
were trying to do that with a very, very different sort of input, which was this long form, first person written stories that are usually prompted, very contextual. So the first thing was building that front end in a web-based platform to be able to mimic, if you will, or leverage what we did in a workshop, guiding people to think about, reflect on, and share their story. The second part was analyzing that. And we sort of intuitively landed on the emotion of the stories is a big part of what's missing from people's understanding of their teams, themselves as leaders, their customers, not just what's happening, but how is it making people feel? And why do they care about it? And we just felt like that was missing. That was the depth of humanity that was missing from so many of our business decisions. And so that commitment started early and we haven't left it, which is to help people not just understand what, but why and how it makes people feel. So to do that, we had to assess the emotions in people's stories. Now, I always say, whenever you're unsure, scale it to one human being doing a thing. If I read a story, I could probably sit back and make some notes about that story and say, it sounds like this is what they're really feeling like going through
Mm-hmm.
based on what they've written. Sounds like they feel this way about that experience. And this is why it's important to them. But that's really time consuming and not scalable. And so you start looking for tools that allow you to analyze the content. And when we started doing this in 2016, of course, there were basic things like sentiment analysis and things like that have been out for quite some time. We stumbled across a product that at the time was being made by IBM and was part of their Watson AI suite, which is called Personality Insights. And it measured the intensity of different personality traits,
Mm-hmm.
needs, and values, and like core emotions. And we were like, this looks like the perfect solution to our problem. So we started building that into our product analysis routines. We started building algorithms that would use that core AI technology, which is predictive in nature. It's also using a form of AI and machine learning called classification. So it's looking at text and understanding, what kind of text is it and
Mm-hmm.
understanding the meaning of that text based on what's adjacent to it and doing all those things in the blink of an eye. So we started building that into the product. And that would allow us to develop what we call an emotional map of each individual story and therefore of all the stories or people in that collection. So you start to see, hey, 70% have high or very high levels of achievement. That's
Mm.
huge if you're an achievement driven culture. If you're an
Right.
achievement driven culture, a mission driven organization, and the achievement level is low, you got a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
But how else would you measure that? Just saying, hey, how much do you feel you achieve what you want to achieve in this company? You get 1 to 5, and by now we know people take surveys just to take them, or they don't take them at all. And so by inferring that from what they write about and the stories they tell, we're getting a much more realistic and richer picture. And then really utilizing some of the more advanced AI and natural language processing tools, we had to kind of build that out further because IBM discontinued that tool back in 2020, 21. So our CTO, Andy Citizen, who was brilliant, was like, normally this would take 5 developers in 6 months. We're going to try to do it with 1 developer in 3 months. And he did. And he built our own set of models using the large language models of the time, Google's BERT model and others. And we got better results than we were getting initially. We got more accurate results than we were getting initially. And so now we're able to reliably and consistently share not just the data, but what the data means with our customers. Here are the stories that people shared and the themes of those stories. Here is the emotional map of their experiences. And both of those we are doing now assisted through AI in the platform. The very next step, which is in development, is what we call SEEQ GPT. And with SEEQ GPT, the top line report will be essentially automated. As soon as you're done collecting stories, your report is generated. And we've been testing this now for about 8 months because I'm not a big believer in just because it's available, you should sell it because most of that stuff is crap and it's not reliable and it's not human. And so what we're really focused on is how do you preserve the humanity? How do you preserve the humanity? So we probably test and beat it up a lot longer than we normally would in a fast-paced tech development culture because preserving the human experience is the most important thing to us. But we're also now bringing that to a scalability and I would say a little bit of speed. Speed is not the most important thing to us, but speed in terms of I don't want to wait months to know the answer to this question.
Yeah.
I'd rather know it in days or weeks. We're trying to do that kind of thing.
How big is your team now? Just curious.
We've got a total of 7 spread across the country. A mix of full-time and some fractional. Most of us are here in Richmond, but we've got team members in San Francisco and Atlanta and Pennsylvania. And so, we've grown, like I said, you got your highs and lows, but we've got more highs than lows. And so growth looks
when
more like this.
you started, you said about 11 years ago?
Yes.
Was it just you then, or did you already start with a small team?
No, it was sort of both because it was me full time jumping into it and trying to attract immediately a small team of what I called invested supporters. So a lot of people who could do a little bit of work in a fractional way or, paying folks initially with just equity, every money and building a little small core team. And then gradually, met Andy and met one of our other team members who since moved on to other things. But then we kind of built that core team. We partnered with a firm here in Richmond called JMI. And JMI, their founder, Ken Johnson, has been one of my mentors and advisors and our partners for most of that 11 years and really helping us scale, really helping us build out a runway, really helping us, support execution and operations when we were definitely bootstrapping. And so, what I've learned from all of that is no matter what you want to do, even if it's quote unquote your big idea, you can't do it alone. You just can't because whatever you want to do alone in my mind is limited by you. Whatever you can expand to attract lots of other people is now virtually limitless. And that was a hard lesson for me because I had a lot of preciousness in the beginning of it and I had a lot of fear and I had a lot of, I'm going to prove everybody that I can do this and probably suffered bumping along the road a lot longer than I needed to.
Yeah.
But once I got past that, once I got more vulnerable and more open and trusting, things really started to take off.
That is a word. I don't think I asked. What about delivery and distribution? Like when you're helping with these organizations with their storytelling, do you deal with the actual publishing of the stories, and if so, what formats, or is it just helping people understand the power of their stories and how to construct them, etc.?
Yeah. 8 times out of 10, the stories we collect don't get published back out as individual stories because they're collected in this sort of kind of private, trusted means, which is what gives us such tremendous and powerful insight to share back with the organization. But even in those cases, what emerges is a story of that organization or brand. that is otherwise not known or told.
Yeah.
And that story is definitely leveraged in a few ways. Sometimes it's part of the organizational's strategy and planning work. And we talk about narrative-based strategy. So you're really able to say, hey, we're not just coming up with these 5 random bullets and making them sound pretty. We're really rooting and grounding where we are going in the story of what we and who we are.
Yeah.
And that is informed deeply by those customer and employee stories. It's
Mhm.
also usually making its way into their engagement and or
Yeah.
marketing strategies, as sometimes we'll deliver content direction like, hey, here's a strategy for you to leverage the learnings of these stories, the emotion, the themes, and turn that into content. So now you know exactly how to engage this audience. There's nothing better than knowing that we're sort of speaking on behalf of the hundreds or thousands of people who share their stories to talk to the tens of thousands or millions of people who can identify with them. And then in a few cases, that other 20%, we explicitly ask permission of participants when they're sharing if they'd be willing to either let the brand or organization reach out to them individually, because otherwise it's anonymized or confidential, or if they'd actually be willing to let their story be used in either internal or external communications.
Mhm.
And in those projects where we are doing that, and we ask that question, the answer, especially on the consumer side, the answer is yes about 95% of the time, even if it's use my story without my name. On the employee side, it's a lot less, because employees really want to preserve their sort of
Sure.
privacy or anonymity in the process. And in that case, that's the trade-off. It's worth it. It's better to get their richer, more honest stories that aren't afraid of what my manager might think, and just focused on their experience and not have to worry about losing their trust or violating their privacy. Even when we do our reports, we will intentionally omit, like if that report's going to be presented to the organization, we don't put any identifying information in there. If we are going to use quotes, we actually, once we know we are looking at the authentic best quotes for that passage, then we modify them to sort of remove identifying details, especially in a smaller organization, because you don't want people to be like, I know who wrote that. Then
Exactly.
that all bets are off. So we really try
Yeah.
to focus on preserving and protecting that individual who shared, because that's the key to the whole thing.
Yeah. Last question. Do you find yourself at this point, about midway through 2025, trying to, when you're looking forward into like the short term future, trying to kind of double down on the efforts that you're doing currently, or is there a big change or big leap that you are hoping to make in the next year?
I love that. Um, we are pushing forward in some different ways. I
Mm.
think none of it is like a hard left or right turn. It's
Mm.
definitely kind of an evolution of what we've been doing, but we're continuing to refine it and get better and learn from the people we work with on what really makes a difference. And, you know, I believe that what we've built in Seek is meant to be a large scalable platform where lots of people can explore and share their stories, and eventually that will look and feel very different than it does today.
Yeah.
I also believe that the tools that are coming online with AI, because we've got such history, we're not chasing fads there. We're very discerning in terms of what will help us deliver on that mission to get. And that mission is to get more people connected at the end of the day. That's why we're actually doing it, is to really drive much, much deeper connection inside and outside the organization, in the marketplace, in the community. And so, I think you'll see us continue to explore more ways for people to share their stories, better ways for us to scale the analysis of what people are sharing, so that an organizational decision maker can definitely still work through us as the team, but work on a much, much larger project, or ask different groups in their organization different prompts at the same time, because they're trying to learn different things maybe in parallel. And then the last thing I think you'll see is the value that we're delivering. This is one of those things where it gets better the longer it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're really lucky, because
Yeah.
the value doesn't diminish. It gets stronger and almost exponential. We've been working with one client in the health and wellness space for about a year and 5 months. And we've been doing iterative, as we call it, iterative learning. So continuing to collect stories and then go back in and analyze those stories and ask different questions and then collect more stories. And, you know, we put it all together just recently. It's like, what does this journey look like? Again, looking backwards. And the CEO said to me, it's like I have my own playbook for how to lead this organization. And that makes me feel like job well done, guys. Like, we're helping leaders who really want to drive that kind of positive change and impact through their brand, through their culture, through their own leadership. We're helping them do it. And I didn't think that that's where we would land per se. I thought that creating better experiences was the outcome we sought. Now I see it as we're helping leaders understand how to create better experiences so they can deliver better impact. And that has got us like ridiculously jazzed because it's such a fulfillment of our journey where we're blending the best of all these worlds, and couldn't be happier.
So exciting, man. I appreciate all the work that you're doing. And I know you got to be excited. Like, you found a really cool intersection of your passions and your skills with this. And I think it's really cool. I don't think I've had a show on like this that's doing exactly the work that you all are doing. So proud of you, man. It's really awesome. It's very inspiring.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate what you're doing and the platform you're creating to explore all things storytelling. I think
I love it, dude.
There's so many applications and use cases, and the fact that you're collecting all of them in one place is huge because it gives people who understand it or want to understand it like a single place to go. I was just back on your website scrolling all the different episodes again, and I'm like, you're covering it from so many deep angles. And, you know, I hope you zoom out and talk about what you've learned about storytelling across all these dimensions, because you could, it's a lab. It's a lab.
I appreciate you recognizing that, because it is intentional. And, you know, most of my audience, I think, are brand storytellers. But I mean, I'm a filmmaker, and so I love having screenwriters and filmmakers on the show. I love marketers on the show. I love live competitive storytellers. And the overlaps are so clear, right? But it's exciting to see all the applications, because I say this all the time. You know, it gets misconstrued, storytelling does, as a marketing buzzword. It's not marketing. It's communication. It's connection. It's human. So of course there's a million different applications, because you're always going to have to connect and communicate with humans to collaborate and do anything. Even in this world of AI, you still have humans on the other side of that thing. And so, that really does excite me and interest me, all the different applications. And it's not just to sell you my product or whatever, or just to entertain you. There's a multitude of ways that we can use that to deepen connection, increase impact, affect change. Now I'm nerding out a little bit, but you set me up. Thank you. I appreciate you for being here, James. It's quite a pleasure, my friend.
This was awesome. Loved it.
Awesome. See you soon, buddy. My name is Rain Bennett. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed that episode, do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. If you're already a subscriber and you're enjoying the show, give us a review and let us know the value that you've gotten from it. We love to hear from our listeners and learn about the benefits that they're getting from the show. That's what fuels us, and that's what fuels the show. And if you've already subscribed and you've already reviewed it and you think there's someone else that would benefit from listening to this show, please share it with them. The more we grow, the more we can help you grow, and that's what we're here to do. Join us next time on the Storytelling Lab.